Hey up guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel where there is something a little bit different for you. I guess it's still technically an experiment for you. I have used the updated 1920 seasons database provided by Steam user Richaro, fancy O thing. I think it's meant to be a D essentially to look at. I think his name is probably actually Richard, but I will link the database for you in the description below if you're looking for it. If you're on Steam, it's the most popular one on Steam right now. It's kind of hard to miss, I guess, but I will link it down below regardless. I did see in the comments below that he has updated tweaked a few players, maybe to bring them up to FM9 to this year's sort of standard. Not sure how wide-ranging or complete that is. I suspect it may just be to the extent of the players that have swapped clubs. Obviously, he's been focused on those players that have needed to be swapped, so I suspect it may be just those ones that have been updated, not necessarily the entire teams of every club in the Premier League. I suspect he's not had the time to do that. So there might be a few asterisks on this, essentially, going forward. However, I have done this simulation 20 times, and this is the average of those results shown before you right now. Manchester City win by 3 points on average here. 85 points for Manchester City on average. Liverpool on 82. Arsenal on 79, not too far behind. Manchester United rounding out the top four with 74. Tottenham and Chelsea in 5th and 6th getting Europa Leagues with 72 points and 64 points. Quite a bit of a drop, actually, for Chelsea there on average. And Bournemouth averaging with 54 points, finishing in 7th. Everton, Leicester, Wolves in the chasing pack there. West Ham, Crystal Palace, Watford after that. And then relegation fight really is between Burnley, Southampton, Newcastle, Brighton, and the 3 promoted teams in the bottom 3 on average. Aston Villa, Norwich, Sheffield United in 18th, 19th respectively. 35 points, 34 points, 32 points on average there for those 3 teams. And this is kind of where one of the first asterisks come into this. Those 3 teams, obviously, if the database is created hasn't gone in and tweaked those players for those clubs in particular, Aston Villa, I suspect, might be the most tweaked in that respect if he's still focused on the players that have been transferred in, because Aston Villa have been busy this particular transfer window. So they're probably going to have the most updated players, Aston Villa. Norwich, and also a second asterisk, I guess here is a second amendment, is that everyone in there has the ages of start of last year, basically. So everyone on this database is 1 year younger. So those players maybe getting a little bit on in ages are 1 year younger and probably featuring a little bit more than they probably will be this season. Those very young players also, again, not got that year's worth of experience. And I feel like that's where Norwich City have been hurt here. Because players like Jamal Lewis, like Ben Godfrey, like Max Aarons, they've got a year's worth of playing time in the Championship last year. That's not reflected in this database. So I feel like Norwich in particular probably been hurt the most by probably the lack of involvement in updating those players to maybe their potential. You saw, of course, it's worth mentioning I'm actually now recording this during the Man United-Chelsea match. Probably not the best thing to be doing, but it's the time I had to do it. It's when I finished the database simulation. So the sacrifices are made for you guys, basically. So basically, everyone said Man United and Chelsea have completed their games right now. But in terms of my personal predictions, I'm taking week 1 out of this right now. And my personal predictions before week 1 started for relegation were Sheffield United, I feel like, whilst probably spirited performances will go down, and Brighton and Burnley were my picks to go down before week 1. Crystal Palace, I had in my mind. Crystal Palace, I feared for Crystal Palace if they lost Zaha, because they really hadn't strengthened their squad all that much in terms of quality players they hadn't brought in. If they'd lost Zaha, they would have been in the bottom 3 for me. But they kept Zaha, and I think Zaha's quality will just about keep them out of... Between Zaha and Hodgson, I think they will just about keep them out of relegation. I think Newcastle's survival depends on how injuries go for Newcastle. I think if Newcastle take a few big injuries, then their depth isn't great. But I think really they've actually brought in a few good players. And I think they probably just have enough for them to keep them out. Benitez may be gone, but the Benitez training is still there. All those players have spent the majority of those players have spent 3 years with Benitez. It's only obviously the new signings that haven't had the Benitez quality training with them. So I think even without Benitez, they've still got that resilience, that sort of togetherness of a team that's really been together for the most part for quite a long time, that team. Not a lot of changes in that team over the past few years. The core of that have not gone unchanged. So whilst that was obviously a hindrance in terms of quality, really, but is a benefit in terms of cohesion, I guess. So I think they might just have enough about them to stay out of that bottom 3, just about. But it's probably going to be I think Southampton is a team, again, with an asterisk here, because I think Hasenhuttl is underrated probably in this original database. I think managers is probably something that's not been updated. I think Solskjaer, in particular, might be slightly underrated in this. I think Hasenhuttl might be underrated in this. And after week 1, I think Graham Potter might be underrated in this particular thing. I've seen his stats. They're not great. So I think those 3 in particular, I think Solskjaer's statistics in the game slightly basically just counterbalance Man United's over. There's a weird thing with Arsenal in particular. I've seen it being mentioned a lot. Arsenal in particular seem to be overpowered a little bit overpowered in the game. And it's sort of a comment I've seen from the community as a whole, is that Arsenal are probably a little bit rated too well in the game. Man United as well. But that was sort of more under Mourinho, where Mourinho's stats are fantastic in the game, but that doesn't really go into his abrasive nature and the sort of how he lost the dressing room in particular last year. I feel like Mourinho was part of Man United's success in the game quite a lot, and he doesn't often get sacked really in terms of those simulations with the beginning database. Solskjaer, of course, is on the original FM database as a temporary manager and usually leaves at the end of the season. But this one he doesn't. This one he isn't. He's a permanent manager in this particular database, and I think his statistics being possibly a little bit too low counterbalance that general slight overratedness of the Manchester United team in the game, and Tottenham's actually probably slight underratedness in the game, and Pochettino's underratedness in the game. And you'll see that a little bit later on with one of the other pages I've got for you later on. But Chelsea, I think, in terms of the players they've got left, I think that's probably about fair. Again, they've got a lot of young players, and I think there's probably a slight situation with Norwich. But the difference between Norwich and Chelsea is those young players have not necessarily played within the Chelsea team. They've been out on loan for the most part. Norwich's players have played together for a year. Again, it's the kind of that young thing situation. And of course, they've got players like Giroud, who is 32 in real life, but only 31 on this, and realistically probably getting more games. I've seen the team lineup for Chelsea. Tammy Abraham started. Giroud starts in this quite often, as you see here. 13 goals on average for Giroud in the season, and that's because he's the starter for Chelsea in these simulations. Maybe not so much this year, actually. So there's that to factor in with this particular one. But Bournemouth actually very consistent. If we go to the position pages, Bournemouth the most consistent team outside the top 6. They finished 8th, a remarkable amount, and actually finished in the top 6 twice. So there is that, and they are the highest average rating outside the top 6 as well, in positions wise. Sheffield United the only one to actually average over 18 in their position, which isn't great really, and kind of backs up my prediction of them being probably bottom. So at the end of this year, I've seen their performance week 1. It was spirited, and spirited does get you a few points, but I don't think spirited keeps you in the Premier League. Sorry. There is that to factor in. Norwich don't too well. Again, don't fare particularly well, but again, I think they're probably solely underrated as a team as a whole, and that's not just Norwich bias in my opinion. That's not just Norwich bias for me. I think they're just underrated in general because let's not forget the season before FM19 they finished 13th in the Championship. That's what they had going into the start of the original database for Football Manager 19, and this now they've been thrown into the Premier League, probably without being updated too much because they've not really brought in too many players. So there is that to factor in, I guess. Aston Villa actually finished bottom as many times as Sheffield United do, but for the other simulations they do average a little bit higher, so that's why they finish 18th on average. But otherwise, Chelsea do finish 6th quite a lot. Manchester City do win it the most times as well. Liverpool next place. Arsenal win it 4 times. Again, that kind of highlights how often they seem to be slightly overrated in the game. Possibly. But we just move over to the goal scorer and the assists. Actually, I'll go back here. Goal scorer wise, there are a few surprises. Namely, Ayew, Cutrone maybe, and Chris Wood, the big one, 2nd on average in this one. Assist wise, not a lot of surprises there. Guess Matic and Matau. I don't know why I said all that, but Mata and Matic, maybe a bit of a surprise, and Iwobi 10th on that one. Obviously, these are averaged over 19 seasons. It's worth mentioning the first season I simulated too far and lost all the individual statistics as a result. So going on to that, it's really about the consistency within the top 20, which is what this page is about. The top 20 is based on the top 20 goal scorers on that page in the detailed players breakdown. So if they're in the top 20, they appear on this database. If they're not in the top 20, they don't appear at all. I wasn't going to go into Chris Wood's individual page on that one to see how many goals he actually scored in that year. Didn't feature, doesn't get anything on that one at all. It's about how often they actually appear frequency-wise, really, on this one. But Chris Wood only avoids being in it and actually scores less than 15 twice. It's 40 or 3 times, I suppose. 14 there, doesn't appear in that year at all, and 13 there. Otherwise, he's very high 17, 18, 19s for the most part, or even over 20. Maybe a good budget pick for Fantasy Premier League. Very good pick for that, maybe. Who knows? Harry Kane, of course, bangs the bin on a regular basis. Salah, up there. Sterling, I feel, possibly underrated in the game, in general. And possibly, from the fact that Sane is not injured at the beginning of this, some of his goals are being poached by players like Sane, and the same applies to maybe Aguero. Interestingly, Aguero, though, is sort of based on game time. These 3 seasons here, where he doesn't feature in the top 20, Gabriel Jesus does. And I think their goal scoring actually flip-flops here. One thing to mention, actually, Jesus here, I think it's this season. Jesus scores 12 goals here despite only starting 3 games. It was. That's a season where Aguero gets 23 goals. He only starts 3 games, I think, this season, but gets 12 goals, mostly off the bench. So intriguing, that one in particular, I found. There's a few ones here where I find things a bit intriguing. Birmingham vanishes for 2 years. I don't know, 2 simulations, I should say, and then comes back again quite nicely. But yeah, I think Giroud benefits from being only 31 in this particular database, so his physicals are slightly better. Cutrone, I think, benefits from Jimenez being underrated in the database at the start of FM19. I don't think Jimenez's stats probably were tweaked. I didn't check, but I've seen Jimenez in my Burnley Twitch saves. He's come across on my scouting menu, and his physicals in particular are very lacking. Is Jimenez in the FM19 original database or even updated database? Of course, Jimenez had a fantastic year for Wolves last year. Cutrone, on paper, therefore, in this database, is a lot better in terms of current ability, and therefore I think Cutrone gets a lot of starts in this particular simulation as a result, and Jimenez doesn't get a look in as much. I think it probably starts with Cutrone and Jota. I think in real life it's going to be a lot more rotation between Jota, Cutrone and Jimenez, mostly because of Europe, of course, but they've got 3 very good forwards there for 2 positions. I think we'll probably see Cutrone probably score a little bit less on average than you see on this particular one. Sadio Mane, you probably see him appear a little bit more often than he does here. Same with, of course, Sterling, as I mentioned before, as well. Jordan Ayew is interesting, though. I feel like Jordan Ayew is in the goal scoring a lot more than, say, Zaha is interesting. Benteke actually features quite often. You can see him at the very bottom of this page as well. He appears a fair few times, does Benteke. Florian Ndoni at Brighton scores quite often. Maybe a good pick for Brighton, particularly how good they looked under Graham Potter this first weekend of this real season. Florian Ndoni might be a good shout as well going forward. As might Neil Maupay, who, of course, may start a little bit underrated from being a championship player at the beginning of the FM19 cycle. You can see here, he only appears 3 times as well. Billy Sharp only appears 3 times. No, all actually in the first few simulations, in fact. Haller appears 5 times at West Ham. Wesley actually a few more times. That as well. So a few of the hires from this year's teams and the promoted teams in particular might do well. Who knows? Obviously, Pookie, again, probably underrated, a player who was brought in on a free by Farke and his team at the start of Norwich's team last season. Probably underrated. He does appear 3 times, though. Of course, scored 29 goals, I think it was, last year in the Championship. So I think Pookie in particular underrated, and is something that you see. You probably suspect Norwich will score more than 35 goals on average this year. You probably suspect that's going to be a slightly higher number. Conceding, probably accurate. They probably will concede quite a lot, but I think they probably will score more than 35. Let's not forget Timo Pukki scored 29 by himself last year. Middle in the Championship, but he's already off the mark with a very clinical finish against Liverpool. Assist-wise, it's a little bit weird. Assist-wise, is a little weirder. There's a lot more variation, a lot more interchangeability with that. Again, older players like Matic and Mata, we've already seen from the Man United lineup today. They're not in it. Starting lineup, you've got players like McTominay starting, and Solskjaer sort of favouring youth. I think Lampard's favouring youth a little bit as well, which is why we'll probably see Giroud not get many goals as this simulation thinks he will. Players really to look at here in terms of maybe points for Fantasy Premier Leagues. Goodmanson at Burnley is a good shout. Proper at Brighton is another good shout here. Leitner at Norwich as well. A good one there. Players like Ericsson not really faring too well, weirdly enough. Salah as well, surprisingly low down this one. But of course he does have goal scoring potency as well, as does Firmino, to add to those particular lockers. Kane, though, top of the average goals, 3rd on average, well, joint 3rd, I guess, with De Bruyne for assists, which is a little bit interesting, I guess. Ozil, maybe overrated in the game, who's to say, I guess, hasn't really performed. Maybe, I don't really... I feel like Ozil gets a lot of stick in terms of how he performs in the Premier League. I don't know what his actual raw stats are for the Premier League, but in terms of the simulations here, is putting in the shifts. Fabinho again. You're seeing a lot of deep line midfielders getting high on the assists here, by the way. Fabinho, one here. Kante, another. Neves is another. Matic, of course, is a fourth here. Seeing a lot of deep line midfielders actually getting in the assists quite a lot. Neves actually looks like he's playing a little bit further forward for Wolves this year, maybe. We don't know how Kante and Jorginho will end up in terms of where they'll start in this particular formations for Chelsea. But yeah, in terms of budget midfielders for the Fantasy Premier League, might not do too badly with Leitner, might not do too badly with Proper at Brighton or Goodmanson at Burnley. Of course, Goodmanson scored at the weekend as well. Very good goal from him. And then finally, just one thing to look at is days as manager, the sack race. Only 3 managers were immune over all 20 simulations. That's Klopp, Solskjaer and Emery. They're the only ones to have survived the entire season, all 20 times. And Chris Wilder was sacked once on the penultimate day of the season. Don't know what happened there. By the way, the 274 days. The first game day was the 11th. There was no Friday game to start off this. The 11th of... Because it doesn't update the year, of course. The 11th of August 2018. And the last game day is Sunday, the 12th of May. So it's 274 days between those two dates. Chris Wilder was sacked on the 11th of May once. This is really weird. Santo, I feel, is a casualty of FM19's maybe slight over-exaggeration of European commitments affecting the league status, or at the very least the clubs not factoring in European games in terms of sacking their manager. You see it quite a lot on FM19. Clubs get into that European spot. The 7th place team, like something like Bournemouth or West Ham or Wolves, like it is in that place, they get into the European League and then they have an atrocious start to the season in the actual league. It's happening right now with Burnley. West Ham won the Carabao Cup in my Twitch save. And won the Carabao Cup in my Twitch save, did West Ham, and now they're in the relegation spots in the start of the season for the season in the game. Pellegrini's probably losing his manager spot as a result. I don't know if he has already, but he probably is going to very shortly if he hasn't already. It's a very, very hard... I think they definitely should factor that in terms of their Premier League, and it does happen. I think Wolves will probably end up around 9th or 10th in this particular season. I think they'll be up there challenging, but the European commitments at the start of the season will probably hinder them a little bit. But I think they'll still probably end up top half. I think 7th, Leicester is my bold choice for 7th. I think Everton on paper probably should be 7th, but I think Leicester will be 7th. Leicester didn't strengthen as much as I thought they would, but I think they will end up 7th. I think they will end up 7th. I think they will just pip, possibly, Everton to that result, who probably should be there. I think Everton should be there. I think Leicester will be. Personally, that's my bold prediction for 7th, by the way. And the potential European spot if, an outsider doesn't get a Carabao Premier FA Cup win there. But you see sort of those teams that are maybe probably going to be top half. If they do sack their manager, it's early on after bad starts. Eddie Howe sacked twice in December. 8th of December is 119 days, isn't it? I know that because Steve Bruce got sacked 3 days in a row on that date. And it got lodged in my brain. But yeah, Steve Bruce doesn't fare too well in these simulations. Hasenhuttl may be a casualty of being underrated in the actual database as a whole. Pochettino, again, I think he's probably underrated in the database as a whole as well. Let's not forget he took Tottenham to 3rd. They had a horrendous second half of the season, let's be honest. But they were very close to challenging them in January and then just dropped right off into 3rd. But did finish 3rd. No, actually, did Chelsea finish 3rd in the end? We still got Champions League football and finished in the Champions League final. But I think Pochettino is underrated in the database and does get sacked fairly often for a top 4 manager, mostly because he doesn't actually finish top 4 in the simulations. Hodgson does get sacked a few times. Gracia at Watford, incredibly available, by the way, at Watford. Watford, all over the place. 9th, 17th, 8th, 17th, 7th, 18th, 20th. Watford actually do get relegated twice, but the simulation before those 2 relegations, they were 7th. It's all over the place, really. Sean Dyche does get sacked a few times for Falk, and Norwich is the only promoted team really to get sacked. Dean Smith at Aston Villa gets sacked twice. Earliest he gets sacked is 27 days before the end of the season. I don't know what's going on there, really. Pep actually gets sacked once, really, and Potter does only get sacked twice, despite not really faring too well on average. So, I think that just sort of more factors in their expectations on the season preview than anything else. These teams that are predicted to be towards the bottom don't really sack their managers until the last day of the season. A lot of them sack them as they get relegated, but not really before that, which is interesting to note. And these teams that are sort of predicted maybe to be slightly higher up, if they have a bad start, do sack their manager fairly early on. You see that with Hodgson here a couple of times, sort of December, January time. Santo in particular, due to European commitments probably more than anything, gets sacked in December an awful amount, as does Steve Bruce, as does Hasenhuttl at Southampton. And if West Ham have a bad start, Pellegrini gets sacked twice in December. Brendan Rodgers gets sacked twice in December, and one side later on. Bournemouth gets sacked. Eddie Howe gets sacked twice in December, and slightly later on as well. It's all of that expectation versus reality in terms of where they are in December. If they don't pull the trigger in December, then they don't really pull it at all. It seems to be the case. And sometimes they last until about February and March, and then they get sacked. But that's what happens there. It's weird. They don't really get sacked quite as much as I think they probably would do in real life. There's one year where only Hasenhuttl gets sacked. And then the previous one before that, only Hasenhuttl and Pochettino get sacked. So there's a few years where only a couple of people get sacked. That's another one there, 2 people there. And the worst year is this one here, where there's 6 sackings, and even then, you probably expect about six people at the very bare minimum really to be sacked a year, the way things are. But it is what it is, and that's the master sheet once again for this, just to give you a quick review of those average positions for the end of the season, according to Football Manager. Now, of course, I think they are slightly affected by the fact that these 3 championship teams are probably still got their championship level rated players in this database. We'll see again when the beta for FM20 comes out. I will redo this when the official FM20 beta comes out with the official 1920 season players and stats, more importantly, comes out. And we'll see how this goes again with that. And it might be interesting to compare those two as well, of course, at that point then. But thank you for watching this if you have. The Cyprus second part of that will come out. If you haven't watched the first part, go check that out as well. The Cyprus one, where I give Cyprus Premier League levels the money, see how they fare in Europe as a result of that. If you've watched my Bradford save here on YouTube, there's a familiar name that crops up in the second part of this Cyprus experiment, which I really wasn't expecting and catches me way off guard. That's a little teaser for you there, but if you watch out for that in the coming days. But until then, thank you and